In the grand scheme of my life, it feels like my mother tongue is the smallest part of me. The part of me that does not grow, that does not evolve, that doesn't expand. It just stays in this one little corner, deep down inside of me. I was born and raised in Alexandra Township, the youngest of many cousins and 3 children of my parents. As much as I was living in a black township where mostly, people were speaking South African indigenous languages, in our home, my grandparents and my parents, they wanted more for us than what the township had to offer most children, which was very limited opportunities. And so they took us to English-speaking schools where they were then put in a position to speak to us in English in order to accelerate our English language skills. Because of that, my mother tongue became diminished. I spoke broken Tswana. I spoke with my grandparents. I didn't read anything in Setswana. I didn't socialize with other friends in Setswana. Nothing of my life took place in Setswana. Very little took place in Setswana. It just existed in this relationship with my grandparents. And really, once they were no longer there, that died. And so did my connection to my language. And so English became the language in which I identified with myself, the language in which I made sense of the world, and the language in which I was most comfortable expressing myself. So that continued to be the case throughout my childhood and throughout my life. Between 2019 and 2022, I was living in Maputo, Mozambique, where for the first time I was confronted by the challenge of learning a new language. While I had lived in other countries before, this was the first time that I lived in a country where I had to learn a new language in order to communicate with people. This experience of learning this new language is what made me realize that learning a language is not about simply learning new words. It's not just about translating the words that you know in your language into now a different language. Learning a new language to a large extent is about taking on the identity of a speaker of that language. And that is why I realized that being immersed in the culture is the fastest and the best way to learn a language, because a language doesn't come alone. It does not come alone. It comes with the culture. There are certain things that you cannot understand with just the language. You can only understand them within the context of the culture. This experience of my world also growing in the sense of being exposed now to new languages and being very excited about now being able to speak a little bit of Portuguese, which allowed me to understand a little bit of Spanish. And my world getting bigger and dreaming of all the places that I could now travel to, being able to speak these new languages or understand at least these languages, it made me ask myself, is there still space for my own language, my mother tongue? This is something that I know is within me. It's part of my culture. It's part of where I come from. But it feels like the smallest part of me within this life of mine that's growing and becoming so big, and this world that's growing, and the exposure that I have now with other languages and other cultures that I want to learn about. But is there still space and relevancy in my own life for my own culture? This reality of living in two worlds, but not fully belonging in either, is very much a product of apartheid South Africa, which viewed people in a binary. You were either one or the other, and you could not be both. Many South Africans have had to straddle these two worlds and find their place somewhere in between. One such person is my older sister, who started school at 3 years old towards the end of apartheid, and she was thrust into this reality of these two worlds.
So I started to crash very early, I guess. My mom was working, and it was in an African-speaking environment. That was surely a number of languages, because in South Africa, in Johannesburg, you have surely our teachers and the children in the township, because I come from a township called Alexandra, which is one of the most mixed areas in Johannesburg and surely in South Africa. So you'd have teachers who'd speak all Zulu, Tswana, Xhosa, and the children also speak all those languages. So I came from that kind of foundational base. My parents took me out of the creche that I was in the township to an English-speaking creche at the age of 2 years old. Very soon after that, at age 3, I went to a very privileged, white-dominated private school in Johannesburg, and that was in, I believe, 1986. My brother was actually the first black child in that school in 1983. Our parents had been, I wouldn't say pressured, but encouraged by the school to be speaking with us as much English as possible so that we can keep up and not battle at school. So my brother found himself speaking English all the time. I did as well, speaking English at school. We were probably speaking more English with each other. My parents trying to speak as much English with us. And so English became very quickly, as a child, a comfortable, familiar language of communication. And at the time, I just want to say that in apartheid South Africa, where you had black people living in black-only neighborhoods, which were in the context of Johannesburg, townships where black people were living, you had white, privileged, better equipped and with better infrastructure neighborhoods for white people. Then you had neighborhoods for Indian people and colored people, so neighborhoods for every racial group. And so we were leaving every day the township to go to the white private school during the day, and then we would come back home in the afternoons to be in a very underprivileged, exclusively black environment. I was living in linguistically two worlds, where I was speaking English and learning in English and speaking English with my school friends, and then coming home, being exposed to a certain amount of Tswana with my parents, surely, but also the children that I would have been playing with, the neighbors, the language I'd hear in the streets was a mix again of African languages, Tswana being, as I say, my mother tongue, a lot of Zulu, and many different other languages that you would have found, in this mixing pot that was the neighborhood I grew up in. That is at a time where it was still illegal for black children and white children to be going to the same schools. My brother had to hide himself in the first couple of years of his schooling because you have inspectors who, I guess, started to know that some schools were breaking the laws, so they would just pounce on the school and come and inspect and make sure that there were no black children there. After the 1976 uprising, where the black children in Soweto and across refused to be schooled in Afrikaans, the huge international spotlight that brought onto the situation of education in South Africa for black people, a few private white schools started opening their doors to black children. So this is like, in the middle of 1980s riots, also in the township, where these schools that were opening up to these children, obviously there was a very few privileged black children who were able to go to these private schools. So you start having also riots and blocks in townships where people say, you can't just be the only one to take your children to these schools. That's unfair. We should all be able to have access, which is very valid. For our parents at the time, them having to almost like usher us in secret out of the township to get us to school. My mom tells me of a story where she came to pick me up at school, and it's the end of the day, and the teacher was reading a storybook to us. My mom comes in, she was early for once, sits in the back, And apparently this boy comes up to her, says, "Who have you come to pick up?" And my mom says, "I'm here to pick up Tshiamo." And the little boy says, "Are you her nanny?" And my mom says, "No, I'm her mother." And the little child looks at my mom, looks at me, sitting amongst the other children, looks at my mom, and I guess for the first time realized that I looked like his nanny, that I looked like my mom, and that I was black and I was not white or like him. 11th of February 1991, I was in now grade 1, which is the first year of primary school, 7 years old. We're at my grandmother's place. There's everyone there on my mom's side of the family, my uncle, my aunt, my mother, my grandparents, the neighbors. The doors open, there's hooting, beep, 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 people shouting, "Viva! Viva! Nelson Mandela!" And you see these images that keep like going on repeat.
I therefore a place
Stretched up.
the remaining years of my life
Amazing.
in your hands.
Everyone in my family jumping around. But I don't understand what's going on. And I'm a small child. So I like pull at my mom's dress and saying to her, "Mom, what's going on? Who is this man and what has he done?" As a child, I'd never heard of Nelson Mandela. Our parents were not talking to us about these kind of things, and we were not supposed to be knowing about this kind of thing because there was a fear that we would then go into our white privileged environment and start speaking, political things, and that was not acceptable. It was nice enough for these white people to let us into their school. Now we mustn't come with our political problems. So Nelson Mandela comes out of jail, and I'm just like, whoa, who is he? What has he done? When I finally get a little debrief of who this man is, that for me was kind of the castle crashing down. That's where everything starts to crumble, because I now am told that the world that I've been living in with my white friends, going to their houses, their parents, my black environment, my black friends, township, clashing and on two different sides of the spectrum. But at the same time, I belong to both of them, and I guess to neither. Because I carried on being in the school, carried on being with these white people, carried on living in the township, carried on, I guess, speaking mostly English. Now, once Nelson Mandela was out, all the muzzles were taken off. People could speak now about the ANC, say the word Nelson Mandela. I mean, it was treason to do that before. All of that is broken for everyone. So people can also say the things that they think maybe that they've been not saying. I remember every day in South Africa, we used to have these ads about peace doves, and there's just a whole peace campaign that was being put in place in South Africa to avoid a civil war breaking out and to just keep everything together whilst, at the time, Mandela and the ANC were negotiating with the National Party and all the different people about what South Africa was going to be looking like post-apartheid, and what we were trying to build. But at the same time, we had the Truth and Reconciliation Trial Commission and the trials of people who had killed Black people, all of the atrocities that had happened that was now coming out. Then I started to understand better. As a child, every time my mom would get into an argument, whether it was at school with the teachers, if I complained about a teacher, or with another parent, like in the parking yard, or even just outside at the shops and stuff, she would say, just because I'm Black doesn't mean, whatever. And so that's something that started to make sense. I realized at the time that, okay, so my mom is like, Blackness has been an issue. I used to think that's just what you say when you argue with people, just because I'm Black, that like that's something that comes up. But then I understood that, okay, so my mom is saying these things because somehow her Blackness is always an issue. The level of exposure of my son at age 7 is just incredible. Age 7, I think, as I say, I was very, very naive. I lived in a very closed world. My parents felt like they had to protect us from getting them and us into trouble. There was a lot of constraint, social, political, and just exposure. My son lives in a world that's really big. He's traveled to Congo, South Africa, Mozambique, Algeria, France, Croatia. He's just so exposed. And he knows that the world is really big. He has a place in it. I think I grew up in a world that was quite small, and even though it was still big for my context at the time in terms of other Black children, I think at the time in a much smaller world, I'd say that, my parents' dream for us when they sent us to these private schools at the time, it takes a lot of guts as a parent and, wanting more for your children to do that, because, we were, as I say, exposed to these teachers who, surely some of them were just hectic racists, but our parents felt that that was worth doing. The dream that my parents had for us by sending us to these schools, that we would never be limited to a limited Black life in an apartheid South Africa that they didn't know when would end, but had no dream, surely, that it would be around 1991 when Nelson Mandela came out, because that's not what the country looked like in the early 80s when they sent us to those schools. They sacrificed so much, their languages, their identity, ours, in so many ways, because they wanted us to be living in a big world. The dream that they had for us, my son is living.
I think there's a sense to which centuries of erosion of our cultures by way of colonialism instilled in many of our parents a lack of value for our languages and the importance of passing them down to us. Imagine feeling like a foreigner everywhere, like Alfie, whose family migrated because of political trouble in Kenya, moving first to Lesotho and then to South Africa.
I am one of 4 boys. I am number 3 in line. Every time we go to any kind of government official, they see that each of us are born in different parts of Africa, and they're sort of like, are you guys all from the same 2 parents? And we're like, yes. And you're all born in different locations? Yes. It's always a bit of a funny story. My eldest brother, Alex, was born in Kenya. That is where both... At the time, my dad was working as a civil engineer. But at that time, there were a couple of things going on from a political standpoint that made my parents realize that, if they wanted to have a safe and healthy environment to raise a family in, Kenya might not be the best place to sort of do that, especially just because of the context of where my dad was and some of the political things that were happening at that point in time. So they first moved to Lesotho, which is where my second brother Felix was born. They lived there for a while, if I'm not mistaken, a bit more than a year, maybe 2, until my mom was expecting myself. And that's when they moved to South Africa. And so myself and my younger brother Chester were born here in South Africa. So my family is originally Luo, from a place. And so that is where a lot of my cultural heritage sort of is rooted. But I was born and raised in South Africa. And, I always found myself in this sort of strange middle ground, because from very early on, I grew up very much in an English surround. As far back as I can remember, I've been here in Pretoria. Though I was actually born in the Free State, like my first memories are here in Pretoria. From very early on, the people that I knew mostly either spoke English or Afrikaans, and my parents didn't speak any of the vernacular languages here in South Africa. And so communication has always been in English within our family. And then we kind of heard a lot of Afrikaans because we're here in Pretoria. The part of this that I found always to be interesting is, there's always been this cultural underpinning of where I'm originally from, which is Kenya, which is this sort of like mystical thing that I never really kind of got to engage with directly. We did go back and visit our homeland quite often, especially when I was growing up. It always kind of felt like I was the the foreigner coming to visit a foreign land, because I didn't speak our language, Luo, and I even up to now only know a few words. But then at the same time, when I'm here in South Africa, I'm also a South African, at least according to my ID, that doesn't speak any kind of vernac and that speaks fluent English and understands Afrikaans very well and speaks somewhat fluently. So, I was kind of this cultural mix of different elements that don't seem to visually fit together. And so for a long time, really, my community and my culture was my immediate family and not very much beyond, because it sort of felt like everywhere else that I would be, there was a part of me that didn't necessarily either look the part or sound the part or speak the part. So my grandmother on my mother's side had a farm in Kenya. When we would go back and visit, that was one of the places we spent a lot of time. So my mom grew up on the farm. She was very much a farm. And so it was a great place for us because, 4 boys who I think have 5 years from the last to the eldest. It was a great place to be. It's this expanse of outdoors. They're like huge trees. And it it really lends itself to running around and playing around and a lot of the things that you wish for when you're sometimes stuck in the city. And we'd have many sort of evenings where we kind of have the fireplace. And she'd kind of be sitting in front of the fire, kind of like even though we had a place to sleep, we'd kind of like sit around the fire there and even just sleep in front of the fire in the evenings, just because it was a nice and fun experience for, young kids to do. But then, you kind of get a little bit older and you start to think about like your own cultural background. Fitting in starts to become a lot more important. I remember we'd gone back to Kenya because we knew that it was she was reaching the end of her life. She represented home with me, at least. I don't know whether I can speak for my brothers, but she was one of the few people in Kenya that I didn't feel like a foreigner to, even though we didn't communicate in the same language, simply because we spent so much time on the farm. What would always happen is we would have to talk to my mom about what we wanted to say, and she would translate to my gran. And then, it was always funny because my mom, firebrand, she always makes her thoughts known and is quite strong in doing so. But when she's with my gran, she kind of becomes this, the little girl again, like sits proper, is a little bit more, withdrawn. More and more it was coming clear that we were probably never going to be able to communicate directly to her. And we were always going to need a go-between. And so everything that we would have to say would kind of, you'd be on the one hand looking at my gran, but also somewhat looking at my mother to communicate what we want her to say. And then my mother would listen, and then she would speak in Luo to my gran about what she would like to say. The one time where we found ourselves speaking a common language was when we were saying a Latin prayer. The only time we have ever spoken the same language was Latin, which I know the prayer, but I don't know the language. And I guess it really just struck me because it was kind of like we had to find this middle ground, which none of us were native to. Which, for a lot of people, they find that middle ground maybe in English, but even English was beyond that. And so this Latin prayer was the only time in which we found that common ground. And though we weren't speaking to each other, we were able to speak the same language. Tradition was the first time that we were able to meet together in terms of language. And, there's much that can be said about religion and about God, and I'll maybe park that for the time being. But just being able to use that tradition in order to find common ground was something that really struck home with me and made me start to really think that there is value, even if I'm never going to use the language, in at least understanding the culture. What is lost when you're in a different country is like, though there may be a lot of turmoil, though there may be political strife, though there may be war, when you move to a different country, you leave things behind. And it's not always obvious what you're leaving behind. Because, I don't think my mom would have said when she was leaving Kenya that this decision would result in us not being able to speak directly to my gran. So that's, I think, that was significant for me. And the second one was, when my eldest brother was taking a very big step in his own life. My eldest brother is married to a lovely Pedi lady named Tato. Like many African cultures, one of the important parts of the process of marriage is the Lobola. It goes by a different name in Kenya, but essentially coming to the bride price. And so for a long time, I kind of had this, I think, quite common idea that, you a Lobola to like this one person or one family is buying this other person, and there's almost like an affront to human sovereignty and the question of freedom. But I think once I actually started to be a part of the process, I realized that any person that believes that simply just either hasn't been in a Lobola that is being negotiated in good faith, or hasn't simply taken the time to explore and understand what it is. On the day of the negotiation, there are two delegations that had to go. The one delegation is and his group, and they will go at the beginning of the day, and they will sort of come there to offer gifts and to discuss and sort of officially show the interest of the groom in the family's daughter. And then in the second half of the day, the parents will sort of come in as a separate group when the first group is heading back home. And then the parents will actually talk about the actual negotiation. So the first group, the idea is to also present yourself as an individual in a way that is separate from the parents and the elders who might have a... So it's almost an opportunity for the groom to present himself, but also present the type of people he hangs around with, because he brings his best friends. The bride's family gets to sort of see who this person is and the type of people that are around them. And then the second delegation is to talk a little bit more about the negotiation. And that's where you talk a little bit about the quality of the upbringing of this individual. And you also get to see the quality of the individuals who have raised these two people who are looking to get married. As the generation at the same level of the groom, you're not actually supposed to be a part of the negotiation. You come and express the first half of the day. So we left Pretoria in the early morning, probably around 4 or 5 in the morning, to drive to Limpopo. And we got to the gate of the house, and we were a tad bit late. So we kind of get to the gate and we're like, we've arrived and we're here and there's no one. We wait outside for a little bit. Obviously, because we're a little bit late, we've committed what you might call in Western culture faux pas. They made us to wait at the gate a little bit. And then, a small girl comes out and they're like, "Who are you guys and why are you here? We were expecting some people earlier in the day, but we don't know who you are." And then you kind of need to sort of placate a little bit, apologize, maybe leave a little bit of a gift. And then, we kind of give the gift to this little girl, and then she runs back into the house, and then she comes out again, and then she says, I've thinking about whether we're going to let you in or not. Then she runs back inside again, and then one of the adults come out and they open for us and they let us in. And that's one of the examples of if seen at face value, that can be looked at as really rude. You've drove all the way from Pretoria to come and see this person, and then they don't even want to greet you at the gate. But it's a lot deeper than that, because one of the things that it actually shows you is, can this person swallow their pride, apologize for a mistake, and do so gracefully? And that is an important thing. Connect yourself to this family. And then another aspect of that is the father of the groom the father of the bride, are not allowed to negotiate. Both of them have to have a spokesperson. And this person isn't a part of the immediate family, but the family must hold them in high regard. And they will speak on behalf of them, because a father can't speak about negotiations about their own daughter and do so with a level head. There are emotions that come with talking about your son or your daughter. And in knowing this, the cultural tradition almost dictates that the person who is able to hear the faults of the son and not get offended, and also paint them in the best kind of light. What you sort of realize in that is that there is an understanding that a parent is too close to their child to represent them to an outside community in an unbiased way that is still flattering. So we had one representative who spoke on behalf of my eldest brother, and he would be a little bit older, maybe like 10 years older than the groom. So the groom, but not the same age as the parents. So it's kind of like a little bit of a middle ground. And he will then speak on behalf of my brother, and he will talk about, this young, educated man who has made his way in the world and has got this bright future, and he'd need to paint this picture of this man who is coming to find the woman that he would like to spend the rest of his life with, but also paint this picture of having lived a fulfilling and meaningful life and have a good future ahead of them. But then at the same time, almost be able to do so in a way that you can almost call unbiased, because he's not a part of the family. At the same time, also my dad would then also need to select somebody from his group and his generation who isn't an immediate part of the family, but can effectively represent the history and the intentions of the parents. One of the things about it that was so interesting is these are obviously people who come from different traditions. So our marital traditions are different from the marital traditions of South Africans. And over and above trying to find a middle ground in terms of two people, we're also trying to find a middle ground in terms of two cultures. And it adds a whole other layer to it. And I think in going through that experience, I eventually came to realize that language is just the surface of our culture. And I think as time has gone on, I've come to realize that the reason our cultures are important has got nothing to do with the color of our skin. It's got little to do with the language that we speak. It's actually a lot more about the lessons that have been learned by previous generations and have been passed down by these traditions and these rituals that allow us, though we might not know what we're doing at the time, they allow us to avoid the mistakes of past generations. I have met so much of Tato's family, and I'm not even in the marriage. I'm some sense just a bystander, though I feel like I've gotten the chance to see where this and the people who contributed to her being the woman that she is today. And that is something that I feel is so lost in the modern idea of a wedding. In the context of a white wedding, I feel like people spend so much more money and so much more time and go through so much stress trying to make it the perfect day. And then at the end of it, nobody knows anybody else. Like, you don't know what kind of family this person is coming from. You don't know like what you've gotten yourself into. I think that was the second time where I realized the significance of that cultural underpinning.
This is a journey that many of us are on, to find the sense of belonging within these two worlds. And depending on where we start, some of us get there sooner than others.
Gamalang, my name is Aphendule Phakade. In fact, my full name is Aphendule Phakade. I'm from the tribe of Ohlamino, Chamaschato, Fakato, Nomani, Ombegisa. We come straight from the Eastern Cape at a village called Ngutu, which is in Butterworth. Butterworth is the town. It's also known as Itua. I was born in Tata. Dad was working that side and my mom was in varsity. Eventually they got together and then I was born. And then a year later, they moved to Johannesburg. They moved with me. And then at 5 years old, we moved to Midrand. Been staying in Midrand throughout my childhood into my teenagehood, a place that was predominantly black people in that school because of all the hoods around Midrand at the time. When I moved to Centurion, it was a different type of environment. It was more mixed, actually, white Indians, coloreds, and so on. I got to learn that mixed masala of being this side in Johannesburg, which is different than back at home where the language and the culture is just amaXhosa. But when we're this side, you are mixed with vendors and Swatis and Tswanas and Bedis and vendors and Afrikaners and Xhosas and Zulus. And, you come to understand the vastness of the tribes that are here. I have this image of myself where I was wearing a Bathe and Nape jacket, like colorful, those days where we used to do dance in hip hop. It was this thing called crumping. I was deep in like the hip hop culture. I used to like wear those caps. Sometimes I wear bandanas, sneakers. Like I'm looking at myself in retrospect, like being that kid walking there. I wonder what perception they may have had. Because there were sometimes we would have a conversation, right? Meaning you're showing off or you are putting up yourself, on a pedestal, whatever, you know what I mean? So but even if they'll say it as a joke, but like they saying it. But I think they had like that perception of, hey, this guy, this rich kid or this whatever. Because I'm not online, like those are fresh kicks, those are fresh jackets. So definitely I would call myself that rich kid if I was there. That's how I was presented. But I think that time I wasn't understanding, that thing was stopping me from relating. And then I think a lot of things changed when I got to the rite of passage. Because when you get of age as a man, you have to cross over from a boy to a man. You have to get initiated. I was finishing high school, was my last exam, and then after that exam I had to go to Eastern Cape and go through the ritual, and stay there for about 3 weeks. The night before I was going to the mountain, I started having conversations with the guys from the village there. They were trying to give me game. Like I saw how everybody took this seriously. It's a serious deal. Like I didn't know the magnitude of it, but there's a certain type of respect that you gain afterwards. But it's a process of knowing that you gotta go through the pain, and that pain is what we all relate with that can allow us to give each other respect. Some of them were scaring me, hey, it's painful, bro. I'm like, oh, I'm not trying to hear this, And then in the morning, me and my pops went to Mthatha, cut my hair, cut everything. I was like, yo, okay, I haven't cut my hair bald in like ever. So I'm having anxiety, I'm freaking out, but at the same time, I'm kind of excited because this thing is like a build-up. Once you do it, you just want to get it over and done with because you can't live not having done it. You're not going to be seen in a certain way amongst your people. You're always going to be a boy in their eyes. You're always going to, So they take it that serious. So they knew this is a step that I have to take either way. And now is the time. So it's like going into the slaughter and it's like, oh, okay. So once you get there, then the traditional healers pull up and all of that, to do the ceremony cutting and all of that. So now most of it is about healing and it's about going through pain and struggles, and it's also teaching you about like life, and they integrated in some of their teachings of knowing that as a man there's going to be struggles, there's going to be tough times, but you got to push through it, coming out of it at the end. And at the same time they're also teaching us certain disciplines. There's a lot of teaching that's going on through that 3 weeks. Like someone can come in that hut, and because he's already OG'd up, he can, say some words for the inmate, how am I saying inmates? The initiates. You don't listen to everything. Some of the teachings are toxic. There are going to be those people who come who are drunk and, who's going to want to talk smack or want to test you and all those things. Like you deal with all of that, but you got to know how to swift through and take what you take from it. the brotherhood that we built there, because I went to a place where there was like 40 something of us, and all men, all naked. Everybody's just naked. You're seeing each other. Like, there's no shame. Like, at first, there's that awkwardness of having to take off and be publicly, you know? It's not something like, hey, man, you walk around naked, like everything off. You know what I mean? But it was like that the whole time. You just got used to it. You started feeling more entrenched in the whole thing. You know, the singing, the painting of the faces, going to mountains there and washing in the rivers, like, you know. So that ish just built like a sense in me of, you know, understanding what this is about. And then coming out of it, everybody celebrating you, all your family's there. You coming in with that blanket, and you used to be there young, seeing that, and you're like, one day that's gonna be me. And now it's you right now. You're like, that guy. You're coming up the mountains. Everyone's celebrating and singing. You know, they're gonna cut a goat for you. You have to finish that goat. You get your siblings and cousins to help you out to finish that goat. People celebrate you, basically. And then you have a ceremony the next day where visitors and everyone come, and there's more people who start giving you advice as well. The mothers talk to you, the fathers, it's just a whole big village thing, and it really does something. It changes something, and you changes something in your mind, like, I'm different. You feel like a new man, and they treat you like a new man. You even wearing that suit, you're walking with that stick, you're feeling fresh. People call you Booty now, they call you Da, Twambu. The kids now gotta call me Booty, cannot call me Da. Just because of that respect of you've made it past that before me. So it makes you older. Even someone who's younger than you by age, if they go before you, they're older than you. Like something flipped. I got a deeper understanding about who I am, about where I come from, about what all of this means. Because before, it was a foreign thing to me too, as much as I was foreign to them. When I crossed over there, I got to a place of sincere humility and understanding, and just gathering and learning, and rooting myself into who I am and where I come from, and then understanding that the privilege or the power I may carry from being this side that can bring help to this side. I started understanding it on a bigger scale. If you are bestowed power, you gotta find a way to use it in the right way for those who cannot use it for themselves. For myself, what changed? Before, I think I was more ignorant to certain things, and I was choosing to, I was kind of dreading going home sometimes, having to work. There's sometimes you're working there, you have to carry stuff, you have to go to this town to buy these things, you have to, there's times where people will send you around. And then the transition when I got to the mountain, I started getting a bit more self-pride and identity, and knowing my responsibility, knowing who I am, knowing where I come from, knowing what my dad is and what my grandfather was. Now my relationship there, it's more so, like, 100 rand, something beer, like, or whatever. Like, I don't mind giving. I know that I have the money, so if I go there, I even make sure that I take out cash, so that, because I know there's gonna be people who are gonna ask, like, family members, on a cigarette or whatever. It's just like a sense of giving, man, and love, and Ubuntu. We know it as Ubuntu. So it puts you there, and you also understand your responsibility. You understand what type of weight that you carry from being on this side of the world, and since you can mix them together, what can you do that can benefit the family, then benefit the village, or benefit whatever. Like, thinking on that lane, because that's also how my father was. He was, it's I starting to understand the privileges and how to use them, and the difference that you can make from being different. I wish that a lot of us knew that in Africa. I wish we knew that the fact that we have such history that we can still visit and live and experience, even in our current time of global unification and so on. When cultures shift and they influence over everybody, it's hard to maintain that. For example, kids now that don't know how to speak their mother tongue, they just speak English now. How are they even going to connect? Because the language is like the key to actually penetrate into that culture and for what it is, because language just carries its own vibration. So if you don't have that key, you're not going to make sense to people who are the law keepers of keeping the tradition alive, because you don't want to corrupt it with anything as much as possible. When things are passed down, you really try to maintain its purity as much as possible. And obviously over time it starts eroding and fading and interchanging, and that's okay, I guess. It's evolution. Our grounding is important for how we move in the world, because now we can be representatives to the world and teach the world also and show them, because they show us. All we do is consume, take in, but do we ever express? Is there a time where we can show our part of the story and picture and, what type of reality we come from? Let's appreciate where we are, this rich soil, this rich land that we live on, with all the beautiful minerals and all the beautiful people, the respect, the culture, the colors, the traditions, the rhythm, the creativity, all of that, man, it's a part of us. And let's appreciate it, man. And let's take care of it. It's important for us to learn so we can properly teach the next generation, because it's going to be on us now. We're going to hold that baton. And we're going to be to blame if we don't do it. Can't blame themselves. We got to blame ourselves if we don't do it.
Maybe there is space within this big world of mine for my mother tongue to blossom and grow. There need be no either or. Maybe the problem brought to us by colonialism and apartheid, amongst many others, is the very concept of a binary. Language is tied to our culture and heritage and the richness of that history, and that is worthy of being preserved. And it is a means of communication and connection cross-culturally.